Hi everyone, welcome to our unit on agency law. Now that we've learned a lot about different civil topics in the law, for example, tort law, contract law, and employment law, one of the topics that brings all of those together is the law of agency. Now, this is a little different from what we learned about earlier in the semester with something called administrative agency law, which is like the Food and Drug Administration or the Department of Labor passing regulations or rules. This is also called agency law, but not administrative agency law, just the law of agency. So I'm going to start with giving you some background information, including some definitions, just so we can use the proper terminology as we talk about the law of agency. In this PowerPoint, I'm also going to talk about the creation of something called agency and the obligations that the parties in an agency owe one another. So again, we understand the relationships of the parties. In the next PowerPoint, I'm going to go over the second critical topic, which has to do with the liabilities of a principal for the actions of his agent. But we'll get to that next. First, let's introduce the law of agency. So the law of agency helps us with this type of scenario. So imagine that I am running Sugarman Bakery and I hire Mo to deliver food for my bakery. So he has a delivery truck and we can talk about whether we think he's driving the truck for my business that says Sugarman Bakery on the side, or maybe he's driving his own vehicle. That could matter or could not matter, but in any event, he's working for me and he's driving around town making deliveries for Sugarman Bakery. Well, he's running late and he speeds, runs a red light, and causes a car accident with Sally. Now, this should ring a bell in your head for something called tort law. The car accident itself is a tort. Mo was acting negligently when he sped, he ran the red light, and caused a crash with Sally. Now let's imagine that Sally has been injured and she would like to become the plaintiff in a lawsuit. Well, who can she sue and who should she sue for the injuries that she has suffered? Again, maybe she lost time from work, maybe her car has some damage, maybe she has some medical bills. Obviously, she can sue Mo because he was driving the car. But could she also sue me and my bakery? Remember, something else we talked about earlier this semester is the concept of business's liabilities. So this is the type of case that I, as the business, could be liable for injuries to this person, Sally, who just happened to be driving on the road when it was struck by Mo, my delivery driver. So do you think that I should be liable for Mo? I mean, he was the one that caused the accident. So some of you might be thinking, yes, Sugarman and the bakery are obviously liable for Mo's actions because he was out driving maybe one of my vehicles, or at least he was driving his vehicle. And the reason he was driving his vehicle was to do a job for me, the Sugarman Bakery. So I should be liable for that injury to Sally. Or maybe some of you are thinking, no, Sally at Sugarman Bakery shouldn't be liable. Mo's on his own. The fact that he was driving, the fact that he was speeding, why should somebody else be liable? And I can think about that too, because why should I, Sugarman Bakery, be responsible for Mo speeding? That's a big stretch, right? We're asking if I should be liable for someone else's actions. The type of scenario we're describing here is exactly the law of agency. When can one person be held legally responsible for the actions of somebody else? And the answer depends on agency. So when we're talking about individuals that are in an agency relationship, we're talking about two individuals. I tried to find some better clip art. One individual we call the principal. And notice that it's spelled principal, P-A-L. That's usually an indicator that the word principal is a person versus principal, like a guiding principle. That's P-L-E. So principal is one person and the agent is the other. The principal is the person who is directing the agent. It should say agent here. I'm going to fix that on Blackboard for you guys. Sorry. The principal is the person directing the relationship. The agent is the person doing the action for the benefit of the principal. So what I just described, the relationship is not equal. You have the principal, who is the person directing the agent. All of the agent's actions are for the benefit of the principal. So just to bring it back to the example of Mo driving my delivery truck, in that example, I, Sugarman, would be the principal because I hired Mo to do a job for me delivering the truck. Obviously, Mo has his own personal life, but that day when he was driving the delivery truck, he was acting as my agent because he was doing an action that is making deliveries for my benefit, the Sugarman Bakery. So that's what we call the agency relationship, the principal and the agent. Well, how do we create such an agency? It's not like we walk down the street and point to people and say, those are all my agents or those are all my principals. Here's the checklist of what you need to do to create agency. First of all, you need those two people, as I just mentioned, the principal and the agent. Second, there must be consent. And what we mean by that is that the agent must consent to be the agent. This goes back a little bit to things we talked about with employment at will. Nobody can force you to be an agent or an employee against your will. There's always a matter of consent. Somebody agrees, yeah, I'll do that for you, the principal. The other element that is required is something called control. And that goes back to what I just said a few minutes ago. The relationship between principal and agent is not equal. The principal is the one controlling the relationship and directing the actions of the agent. So let's put a couple of concrete examples on here to bring it back to something else we did this semester with the concept of partners in a partnership. Partners in a partnership are equal to each other. They're both partners in the partnership. One is not the principal and the agent. An example of principal and agent would be much more closely aligned with what we just did in employment law. An employer and an employee are a classic agency relationship. The employer is controlling the actions of the agent while the agent is at work. So that's what we mean about the concept of control. The agent is doing his actions for the benefit of his boss, his employer. Once these elements are met, the last element is that of fiduciary. The relationship of agency goes back to this other concept we've touched on all semester, which is fiduciary. The agent is a fiduciary of the principal. I'll talk more about that in a couple slides, but I hope you're already thinking that what this means is that the agent has a duty of good faith, of fair dealing, of cooperation with the principal. So what's not on this list? That's all that's required to create agency. Notice what's not required. There does not need to be a written agreement to create agency. And by the way, we kind of know this because we've talked about how a lot of us go to work as employees at will and don't have a written contract. Remember, back to something else we talked about this semester, the only time a contract has to be in writing is if it falls under one of those statute of frauds categories. Agency by itself, that's not a statute of frauds category. So we can create an agency relationship for purely verbally, unless it's like, a contract that's going to last more than a year, in which case for statute of frauds purposes, it needs a writing, but not because it involved agency. There also doesn't need to be a formal agreement. It's not like we have to meet and shake hands or, sign something together. Compensation is also not required. So someone can be an agent and not get paid. Now, employees, obviously we want to get paid for doing the work we're doing for our principal, but payment or compensation is not required for the creation of the agency itself. So let's go a little bit deeper with how this agency works. Remember how I described that the relationship is not equal. So we have the principal, this is the one directing the relationship, and we have the agent, he or she is down here doing work for the benefit of the principal. The agent owes obligations and duties to the principal. We just said this. We call these the fiduciary duties. That agent still has a duty of loyalty, a duty to not engage in conflict of interest or competition. So those are obligations that the agent owes the principal, but the principal doesn't owe the agent because this is not an equal relationship. This is not partners in a partnership who both owe each other fiduciary duties. This fiduciary duty is a one-way street. Take a look at your book for some examples of where employees can potentially get into trouble because they're violating this fiduciary duty to their employer because they are agents. This also means that employees or agents should not obtain the outside benefits, from some other entity. and they have a duty to obey instructions and follow whatever guidance their principal has given them for doing the job. But this does not mean that the principal is off the hook, that he just sits there and says, well, I don't owe my agent anything. In fact, the principal also owes duties to the agent. One of them might be compensation. So although compensation is not required to create the agency, if the two agree that the principal will compensate or pay the agent for his work, then he owes that compensation. The principal can also owe a duty of indemnification, which means to not hold the agent liable for mistakes or actions taken in the workplace. And last, but certainly not least, is the duty of cooperation. What we mean by this is that the agent shouldn't be out there to flail and sort of be on his own. A really easy example would be going back to Mo and the bakery. If I run a bakery and I would like Mo to deliver my goods around town, and I say, okay, you're going to be my delivery driver, and Mo doesn't have a car, well, I really need to give him a car. I also need to give him directions of where to go and who to drop off the delivery to and where to go that day. That's all part of the duty of cooperation. I need to give Mo the tools that he would need to do whatever it is his job is, right? I can't just leave him out there on his own, like, you go figure this out. So I have to cooperate with my agent. I also, although I didn't write it here, principals also have a duty to reimburse agents for expenses that are reasonably incurred for actions that the principal asks the agent to take on his behalf. That can also be included. So I hope this helps explain that the agency relationship in general, and that we can now understand why this is so critical to moving on to the next step, which is what happens when that agent makes a mistake, like gets into a car accident, or what happens when the agent signs a contract, possibly on behalf of the principal. The big question is, when is the principal on the hook legally or legally responsible, liable for the actions of his agent? So we're going to explore that in the next PowerPoint.